Video games. We like to play them, we like to think about them, but mainly we like to argue about them. Here at TripleJump, though, we don't just like to argue about things, we like to win those arguments about things. And that's why today we aren't just ranking every PlayStation franchise from worst to best, we're ranking them with a mathematical precision that no human being could possibly disagree with. You're welcome. Yes, to determine the rankings, we aren't going to rely on silly concepts such as how fun a game is, how much we enjoyed playing it, how well it was designed, etc. No, we're ranking every PlayStation franchise from worst to best based solely on the average Metacritic scores for each game in each series. But before we get to the rankings, a few ground rules. Firstly, we are defining a PlayStation franchise as a series developed by one of Sony's first or second-party studios. Including third-party studios would make this list much too long and far less specific to Sony consoles, so don't look for Call of Duty or FIFA here. So, honourable mentions for Tekken, Metal Gear Solid, and GTA then, as while all of them had trilogies that at the time only appeared on PlayStation, they weren't actually exclusive and started life elsewhere. Sorry guys. Secondly, we're defining franchise as a series that has at least 3 games, not counting spin-offs, remasters, collections, or direct remakes, and that means no The Last of Us. Okay? The term spin-off is often open to interpretation as well, but we'll simplify it this way. If it's clearly an entry in the same overall storyline or gameplay experience, we will count it. If the characters are in go-karts, we won't. Also, we're not including licensed sports franchises because we don't want to play them. Oh, and also because in almost every case a very similar game is released year after year with minor tweaks and improvements, and that's boring, and you don't want to come here to be bored, do you? And finally, Metacritic does indeed have averages for almost every game covered on this list, but in a few cases they didn't, and we had to use averages from game rankings instead. We did spot check a few games at both sites though and found that the averages were nearly always within a point or two of each other, so we think games rankings makes for a fair substitute. Let's rank them. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here is every PlayStation franchise ranked from worst to best. Number 30. White Knight Chronicles, 63.66%. Who will come to the defense of White Knight Chronicles? Not the critics, that's for sure. With only 3 games in the series, White Knight Chronicles just barely meets the requirements for being on this list, which makes its position at the very bottom quite appropriate. The first game received an average of 64% on Metacritic, which isn't great. Complaints were leveled at just about everything, from an unengaging story to poorly thought out battle mechanics, with a general theme that the experience felt quite empty and uninspired. When a sequel was announced, critics expected the issues to be ironed out, but they were not, leading to an even less impressive average of 60%. The PSP prequel, White Knight Chronicles Origins, actually fared the best, with its comparatively kingly average of 67%. This is the only series on this entire list without a single game managing to crack an average of 70%. White Knight Chronicles doesn't offer anything that you can't find elsewhere in far better RPGs, and we find it difficult to argue with the critical consensus on this one. Number 29. Cool Borders, 68.23%. Do you like boarding? Do you like boarders who board? Do you like boarders even more when they're cool? Do you have no other games for your PS1? If you answered yes to all of those questions, you might, and I emphasize might, like Cool Borders. Cool Borders was one of those games that everybody played on the mere grounds that it existed, and that's also just about the nicest thing anyone can say about it. It was fun enough, but not particularly well made. Critics at the time complained of visual glitches, broken physics, unreliable mechanics, and poor controls, but it still earned an average of 74%, likely due to the novelty of it being a snowboarding game, which was a genuine rarity. Hopes were high that sequels would iron out the kinks, and they did not. The average scores only went downhill from there, never reaching 74% again, and bottoming out at an embarrassing 56% with the final game in the year 2000. Many games age poorly, but Cool Borders was never that great to begin with. It was a unique time waster when it debuted, but it never improved beyond that, which explains why it's chilling out near the bottom of this list. Number 28. Buzz and Buzz Jr., 70.69%. Buzz is a series of game show-themed trivia titles hosted by the scariest-looking quizmaster in history. Don't look into his eyes! Well, technically, it's 2 series. We could have broken out the 5 Buzz Jr. games and treated them as their own series, but Let's be honest, you don't want to hear about buzz twice. These games required physical buzzers rather than your controllers because you already owned your controllers and companies prefer it when you pay for new things. As you might expect, the games in the Buzz series differed mainly in terms of the questions they contained. Different titles featured different topics, and there were even regional variations that would change questions to suit different audiences in different parts of the world. Despite the minimal changes between games, though, the average scores differ massively, ranging from 61% all the way to 80%. Buzz seems like the kind of series that could easily resurface, especially with the rise of downloadable titles, but another trivia company called BuzzTime filed a lawsuit in 2008 alleging that Sony had infringed with its similarly named series. The issue was ultimately settled in Sony's favour, but it's possible that they just don't want to get stung again. Number 27. Ark the Lad, 71.45%. If you grew up in Japan, Ark the Lad might be a bit more meaningful to you than it is to Western gamers, as the series was already several games deep before it ever made it to English-speaking territories. In fact, the first game, which Japanese gamers got in 1995, didn't officially come to the West until 2002. Unfortunately, this game never really found its audience over here, and that's okay actually. Ark the Lad is good, but it's far from great. The series never quite had a handle on what it wanted to be, with its story being rewritten and combat mechanics being completely redefined several times in the span of just a few games. RPGs do often evolve their battle systems over time, as they should, but with Ark the Lad it felt more like the series was trying everything in the hopes that eventually something would work. These gambits were largely unsuccessful, resulting in a series that once hit an 81% average with its second game and sinking to a 59% average with its last. Technically, the series is still alive as Japan received a mobile entry in 2018. It retcons previous games and introduces another new battle system. Never change, Ark the Lad. Number 26. Spyro the Dragon, 72.33%. Are you disappointed to see Spyro so low on this list? Us too. And just wait until you see some of the absolute crap that's above him. In all honesty, we were quite surprised. Spyro was one of the defining mascots for the PS1, and fans still adore him, as we can clearly see from the success of the Reignited trilogy. The problem is that, well, there's more to Spyro than a trilogy. Had the series stopped after the third game, Spyro would rocket all the way up to the number 3 spot, but it continued, never managing to find a way forward for the series. Spyro 3: Year of the Dragon holds an impressive 91% average on Metacritic, but the highest any other game got after that was 76%. The series hit its critical lowest with Spyro Shadow Legacy, which ended up with a humiliating 50%. And, to add insult to injury, we considered the Legend of Spyro games to be a spin-off series, and had we included them, the poor Purple Dragon's average would have sunk even lower. I suppose you could say his later games were really dragging him down. Yeah. Dragons. Number 25. Twisted Metal, 73.76%. Twisted Metal might be one of the classic PlayStation franchises, but it didn't manage to win over critics in a meaningful way. The deliberately ridiculous vehicular combat series did find an enthusiastic fanbase though. In fact, a whopping 7 games in the series sold well enough that they were re-released under the PlayStation Greatest Hits banner, so why the disparity between critical reception and fan reception? It's difficult to say really, with the average scores being all over the place and not indicating any kind of clear trend. Twisted Metal 1 and 4 ended up below a 70% average, and Twisted Metal 3 didn't even hit 50%. Twisted Metal Black earned the series its highest rating ever with an impressive 91%, but its 2 follow-ups were right back in the 70s. The series largely succeeded at what it tried to do though, which is throw players into a demolition derby and let them kick 7 shades of motor oil out of each other. There have been a number of cancelled attempts to resurrect the series, and if it does return, we'll welcome it back with open arms, as in open armaments. Huh? It's a good pun! Like the critics, you just don't get it. Number 24. SIREN, 74.62%. SIREN is the only series on this entire list that saw a better score with every game. Whereas every other series experienced a critical stumble at some point, SIREN only improved in its reception. However, it also saw only 3 titles before falling into obscurity. But why? Well, probably because an improvement with every game still left it with an overall average beneath 75%, suggesting that it wasn't likely to achieve greatness anytime soon. That's understandable, but unfortunate. This survival horror trilogy never hit the heights of Resident Evil or Silent Hill, but it had a lot of interesting ideas of its own that future games could have improved on. The main gimmick of the series is sight jacking, which is not what it sounds like and allows you to see and hear events from the perspectives of different characters and even monsters, giving you a better understanding of what's happening around you and more deeply immersing you in the spooky atmosphere of the games. It's a great idea that maybe deserved a little more time in the oven. Survival horror fans who missed out on Siren should absolutely track down all 3 games, but they should also be prepared to face the most terrible horror of all, the horror of unfulfilled potential. Boo. Yeah, I know. Number 23, SINGSTAR, 74.66%. Do you enjoy singing along to your favourite songs? Of course you do! Do you enjoy looking like an idiot while doing so? Well, if you do, here's SINGSTAR, I suppose. Of course, that's a bit harsh. SINGSTAR is clearly designed with friends and family in mind. It's the kind of series that lets players have a little bit of silly fun without taking it very seriously. At least, we hope that's the case. Nobody plays SINGSTAR seriously, right? At the very least, we can confirm that critics didn't take SINGSTAR seriously. The average score for each game ranges from 65% to 82%, which is a hell of a spread, but even the positive reviews featured the predictable complaints. There weren't enough songs in each game, releases were split across volumes to increase sales at the expense of content, certain songs were only available in specific regions, you get the picture. If the idea of listening to your father warble his way through It's Raining Men sounds like a fun night in, you'd probably rate SINGSTAR a bit higher on your personal list, but for everyone else, SINGSTAR was a mediocre series of music games that we don't think needs a reunion tour. Number 22, PIXELJUNK, 75%. The scores for PIXELJUNK represent an even wider range than we saw with SINGSTAR. This time the series peaked at a respectable 87% for PIXELJUNK Shooter and marked its low point with 62% for PIXELJUNK Racers. From the names of those games alone, you can probably tell that the PIXELJUNK series hops genres constantly. This keeps the games fresh, but one can't help but wonder if the regular scores in the 60s and 70s range don't prove that the PIXELJUNK team need to take a bit longer finding its groove before moving on to different ideas. Having said that, it's genuinely nice to see a series willing to take risks and reinvent itself. PIXELJUNK games have a large amount of charm, and a few of the games, PIXELJUNK Shooter and PIXELJUNK Monsters, are held in decent regard. The first series of PIXELJUNK games consisted of 8 titles, and the second series consisted of 1. And just in case you're wondering, the 10th title was a VR spin-off. Does that mean PIXELJUNK is dead? Not necessarily. But it is suspiciously quiet, and it wasn't all that healthy to begin with, so don't get your hopes up. Number 21, MEDIEVIL, 75.17%. With the upcoming remaster of MEDIEVIL scheduled to release around Halloween this very year, you might think it's the right time to revisit the series, and while you could certainly do worse, the remaining 20 entries on this list prove that you can also do a lot better. The first 2 games in the series received an 80% and 79% average respectively, which we think is a bit high. To be honest, they were good games, but forgettable apart from their comedy horror aesthetic. Even the positive reviews see fit to mention that the controls aren't great, the design is sloppy, and the camera is an active hindrance. By the time of MEDIEVIL Resurrection, the third and final entry in the series, the novelty had worn off with a critical average of 66%. That was essentially the last nail in the coffin for the adventures of Sir Daniel Fortescue, but we'll see what happens after the remaster. There's the ghost of a good game here after all, and when it comes to video game series, even disappointing ones, sometimes they come back. Number 20, SOCOM, 76.2%. Have you ever wanted a game that would make you feel like Navy SEAL Richard Marchenko, the Rogue Warrior himself? If so, well, there's Rogue Warrior, so you should probably play that. Anyway, SOCOM US Navy SEALs exists, a series that is sometimes not bad. Its ranking on this list may not be very high, but its unabbreviated title translates to Special Operations Command United States Navy Sea, Air and Land. That gives it the longest name on this list, which is, kind of an achievement in itself. SOCOM is a series of third-person shooters in which players must complete various high-risk missions to keep the world safe for democracy, or whatever passes for democracy these days, am I right? Ha ha! It wouldn't be totally correct to refer to SOCOM as realistic, but the protagonists are far more vulnerable to gunfire than those in many other games. This was a refreshing acknowledgement that even when you're a soldier, getting shot sort of hurts. There hasn't been a new entry in the series since 2011, but for what it was in its time, it was a decent enough take on real-world combat. Number 19, ECHOCHROME, 77.66%. A puzzle platformer based on the impossible concept seen in the work of artist MC Escher. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, it actually was. Whether or not the trilogy of games lived up to its potential is certainly a matter for debate, but ECHOCHROME made clever use of the video game medium and gave us just a small taste of what it might be like to walk around some of Escher's mind-bending scenarios. The series didn't review poorly. The first 2 games averaged 79% and the third 75%, but like many puzzle games, it may have been limited by its own concept. Once players have solved enough iterations of the same few puzzle ideas, there's little reason to come back for more. And as such, ECHOCHROME was probably smart to disappear into the shadows after only 3 entries, but we would eventually like to see another, or perhaps a remastered collection. And hey, here's a hot and fresh science fact for you. ECHOCHROME 2 holds the world record for longest composition ever recorded for a video game. The track is called Prime number 4507. It's just over 1 hour and 15 minutes long, and it's quite lovely actually. Be sure to check it out if you ever show up 1 hour and 15 minutes early to your dentist or something. Number 18. Crash Bandicoot. 77.74%. He fared a bit better than his purple dragon friend, but Crash Bandicoot's relatively low ranking is due to the same tragedy. The series kept going after part 3. Crash Bandicoot Warped earned itself an incredible and much-deserved 91% average on Metacritic, but the next game in the series, Wrath of Cortex, ended up with 66%, and that is a massive drop. It's not really one that the series has ever recovered from either. Had Crash Bandicoot come to an end after its debut trilogy, it would have ended up in the number 6 spot on our list, which would not have been too shabby. Instead, it's ranked down here between 2 things many gamers may have never heard of. Crash isn't a lost cause, however. The Insane trilogy and Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled have proven that there's still a market for the orange monstrosity, so long as his games are, good. It remains to be seen whether this resurgence of interests leads to some new titles, but we certainly hope it does. After all, that's Crash's only shot at moving up this list, and we think he deserves an opportunity to do just that. Number 17. MOTORSTORM. 78.6%. MOTORSTORM might not have been the best PlayStation racer, we'll get to that one, don't worry, but it may have been the most cathartic. There was certainly something satisfying about slinging vehicles around a track and smashing them violently to bits, and the series had a total of 5 releases, each with its own tweaks and locations, and the quality stayed more or less consistent. Average scores for the games range from 72% to 84%, which really isn't much of a spread. It was far from a deep experience, but it was one that brought a lot of really nice touches. For instance, both the vehicles and the tracks were destructible, making every race feel different and forcing drivers to react on the fly to whatever happens to the track ahead of them. There was also online multiplayer, which went a long way towards keeping the series exciting and replayable. MOTORSTORM was no masterpiece, but as with an actual car wreck, it was impossible to look away. Number 16. Ape Escape. 78.75%. Oh, Ape Escape. Where have you gone? The first game earned an impressive 90% average. In fact, a few of the series ranked higher on this list never had a single game review that well. It was quite the stellar start, and at first glance there's no reason Ape Escape should have ever run out of steam. A humorous series about capturing, escaped apes with a huge variety of environments, items and obstacles is the sort of formula you can tweak forever as long as the releases stayed fun. And to be honest, they did stay quite fun. Ape Escape 2 ended up with a respectable 82%, and Ape Escape 3 slipped to 77%, which is disappointing but by no means terrible. What's likely the problem is that the series oversaturated its own market. There were only 4 games in the main series, but there were a whopping 10 spin-off titles. Why? That's more than twice as many, and that's bound to have led to fatigue. We aren't counting spin-off scores, so they aren't the reason for its placement here, but they might well explain why Ape Escape lost its appeal. Number 15. Killzone. 78.83%. First-person shooters are a dime a dozen. Not literally, that business model would be unsustainable. And while it doesn't take much to make a competent shooter, it takes a heck of a lot to make one that stands out. Killzone didn't really? Even favourable reviews of the highest ranking games often saw fit to mention that the series couldn't exactly be accused of being ambitious. The series had a decent but unremarkable debut with a 70% average, but then Killzone 2 hit a home run with a truly impressive 91%. The other games ranged from 73 up to 84%, essentially making the first two numbered games outliers. The futuristic series takes place in a time of constant war, cycling through different protagonists and antagonists between games, often because they'd fall in battle. There's probably a compelling story in there that could have been told, but the series focused more on satisfying gunplay and multiplayer, and that by no means is a bad thing to offer in a gameplay-focused series, but the fact that Killzone offered little else is likely what kept it from climbing any higher on this list. Number 14. Resistance, 79.4%. If you aren't already a fan of first-person shooters, Resistance probably won't win you over. It does have some fun weaponry and multiplayer, but it's definitely closer to very good than great. Its most appealing attribute is its basic concept, which sees the world settling into peace after World War I, which actually wouldn't be a numbered war at all. This prevents World War II and the rise of the Third Reich. Also, America manages to avoid slipping into the Great Depression, so wins all around. Right? Not quite, because aliens. Okay, yes, we're simplifying the concept. In fact, to get the full experience of the series' alternate timeline, you'll have to not only play the games, but read 2 novels and a stretch of comics. It all runs much deeper and darker than we can get to here. But yes, in summary, because no Nazis, aliens. Fittingly for a series about alternate history, there is a timeline in which Resistance is much higher on this list. If the Vita entry, Resistance Burning Skies, didn't exist, the average score for the series would increase significantly to 84.75%, rocketing it to the number 8 spot. Number 13. Siphon Filter, 80.24%. For a time, Siphon Filter was a PlayStation staple, with 6 releases spread across the PS1, PS2, and PSP. The third-person shooter/spy adventure series is certainly a bit clunky in hindsight, but for its time it was an innovative and immersive console experience. The series mainly focuses on Special Agent Gabriel Logan as he and his team attempt to seize control of a dangerous biological weapon from a group of fanatical terrorists, though it went through many rewrites and iterations. In fact, at one point it was about a group of scientists forced to either build a time machine or be executed. What fun that would have been. Part of the reason for the game going through so many different concepts during development is the fact that developer Eidetic had only one game prior to this under their belts, and that game was Bubsy 3D, an act of fanatical video game terrorism in and of itself. Eidetic was understandably worried about their future and wanted to redeem themselves, which they did. The first Siphon Filter hit a 90% average on Metacritic. 3 other games in the 6-game series broke 80%, and it's always nice to see impressive work come from humble beginnings, and very few beginnings are humbler than Bubsy 3D. Good lord, avert your eyes! Number 12. A tie between LOCOROCO and PATAPON, 80.33%. LOCOROCO and PATAPON both ended up with the exact same average score on Metacritic, the only time that's happened on this list. For that reason, we decided we'd lump them together, if that's okay with you. Both series are famously abstract in their concepts. LOCOROCO is a bright, bizarre platform puzzler, and PATAPON is perhaps the only god game rhythm series in history. They both have their appreciative fan bases, and as you can see from their respectable place on this list, the critics were taken by their quirky charms as well. LOCOROCO and PATAPON both do sometimes come up in conversations about franchises that fans would like to see return, but so far there hasn't been any news of future titles. And that's not entirely surprising. Games with concepts that aren't exactly easy to articulate to newcomers tend to be the ones that fall off the map for a while, but who knows? Perhaps in a few years we'll find ourselves struggling to describe these games all over again. Number 11. Infamous, 82.66%. Infamous is perhaps best known as Prototype, but with electric powers. Now don't worry, we're not taking sides, although I am personally an Infamous guy, and we also refer to Prototype as Infamous, but with fleshy biomass powers. The series follows the stories of everyday superheroes, or superheroines, who can choose to use their powers for good or for naughtiness. The first 2 games, which happened to be the best received ones, focused on Cole McGrath, and the series moved on to Delsin Rowe for its 3rd. All 3 games averaged scores between 80 and 85%. We went back and forth over whether or not to consider Infamous First Light a spin-off or a proper title, ultimately deciding not to, as it's just a new character in exactly the same map that Second Son took place in. First Light featured another protagonist, Fetch Walker, and a number of critics lauded her as the best one the series has had. However, the rest of the game proved divisive, and not including it in our averages works in the series' favour, as First Light's score of 73% would have brought it down a couple of spots on the list. With the simplicity of the infamous template, give a nobody with a silly name superpowers and have them rampage through an American city, we'd be shocked if we don't see the series return. And with that, we move on to the top 10 Sony franchises of all time. Number 10. Sly Cooper, 83%. For a few glorious years, Sly Cooper seemed like he could become an enduring gaming icon. The visual style of the series is absolutely phenomenal, and its classical approach to thieving and overall roguery gives its universe a clear and unique identity. But after his last outing in 2013, and without any real reason, Sly just sort of disappeared. This is a genuine loss, as Sly Cooper had real potential. It had a fantastic cast of characters, clever writing, and a smart mix of stealth and platforming. Okay, the stealth maybe wasn't as defining an aspect of the games as it should have been, but that's all the more reason the series could have used a little more time to grow. Ultimately, yes, there is no shortage of cartoony platformers, but rarely do they have anywhere near the style, wit, or personality of Sly Cooper. It's one franchise we hope will sneak back into our lives at some point. Number 9. Warhawk/StarHawk, 83.1%. Warhawk and/or StarHawk are confusing. The first game, Warhawk, was released in 1995 for the PS1. It has no relationship with a completely different game called Warhawk that was released in 1986. Got that? Good. The second game in the series is also called Warhawk, released in 2007 for the PS3. This one is often referred to as a remake of the 1995 game, and the fact that it uses the same name would make sense in that regard, but it was actually developed as a sequel. Then, late in development, the single-player campaign was cancelled and it became multiplayer only, a complete reversal from the single-player only 1995 game that this game ostensibly remade and/or followed up on. Are we following along, everyone? Then, the third game, released in 2012, changed the name to StarHawk, though it has no relationship with a completely different game called StarHawk, released in 1979. Also, StarHawk is often referred to as a spiritual successor to Warhawk, or possibly Warhawk, but not Warhawk, though it was initially intended to be a sequel with the single-player campaign restored before it became something that may or may not have anything to do with the other games at all. Anyway, we hear they're pretty good. Number 8. Jak and Daxter, 83.4%. Naughty Dog followed up Crash Bandicoot with an all-new series on the PS2. Jak and Daxter takes place in a deceptively rich world with an interesting backstory, one that runs on a mix of ancient and advanced technology. Jak's friend Daxter is transformed into a wisecracking weasel-otter hybrid, of course, and the two have a cartoony adventure in the vein of Super Mario 64, with large levels filled with multiple goals, hidden secrets, and tons of pickups. At least, that's the first game. The series grew progressively darker as the characters grew up and found themselves facing situations that were decidedly less lighthearted. The evolving tone of the series means that even fans of Jak and Daxter might not like many Jak and Daxter games, but it definitely showed off Naughty Dog's ability and willingness to explore larger ideas. Overall, critics were on board with the experiment. The first game did represent the high watermark of the series with its 90% average, but the next three still managed averages between 84 and 87%. Not too shabby. Jak and Daxter did go out on a low note with The Lost Frontier, though, saddled with a 71% average. But Naughty Dog has refused to rule out a return for the series, so it may not be stuck with a disappointing conclusion forever. Number 7. Ratchet & Clank, 84.75%. Insomniac's Ratchet & Clank games aren't held in quite as high a regard as Spyro nowadays, but in terms of overall critical reception, it's leaps and bounds ahead. This is mainly due to the fact that after the first 3 games, Ratchet & Clank managed to retain a more or less reliable level of quality. Did you hear that, Vivendi Games and/or Activision? Insomniac made a conscious effort to evolve the series with each game to keep pace with changing trends in the industry, and they largely succeeded in doing so. Were all fans satisfied with every outing? Of course not, but they never got a game that averaged lower than 76% on Metacritic, and that's something to be thankful for. Much of the appeal of the series comes from its often bawdy sense of humour. The games had titles like Going Commando, Quest for Booty, and Up Your Arsenal after all, as well as the ridiculousness of the characters and weapons. We haven't gotten a new game since 2013, apart from a remake of the first game, which we aren't counting here, but we'd love to see a revitalised return for the duo in whatever form that might take. Number 6. Everybody's Golf, or HOTSHOTS Golf, if you want to get serious about this, 85%. Known as HOTSHOTS Golf in North America for most of the series, Everybody's Golf surprised us with its high placement on this list. Not because it's a bad series, far from it in fact, we just didn't expect it to have such high scores across the board. As a strict golf simulator, Everybody's Golf could be considered a failure, but as a series that uses the concepts, mechanics, and physics of golf to create a unique and fun experience of its own, it's a clear success. The secret to Everybody's Golf's success in this regard is consistency. No game in the series has ever broken the 90% barrier, but only 3 times in its history has it fallen below 80%. And even then, its lowest averages are still impressive 75% for Everybody's Golf VR. It also doesn't hurt that the series has featured characters from other franchises at various points, including Gex, Medieval, and Professor Layton. In fact, that's a fair way to bring new fans to the series. Did you get it? Number 5. WIPEOUT, 86%. WIPEOUT has earned its impressive placement on this list, and it's still not the highest rated racing series. Can you guess what? I bet you can't guess what that is. This beloved futuristic racer was strong right out of the gate, with the first game netting a solid 90% average from critics. The second game in the series did even better, with 93%. Admittedly, the series never hit those heights again, but only once did it fall under the 80% mark, and even then it was by exactly 1 point. Throughout the life of the series, critics almost universally lauded the incredible sense of speed, cutting-edge graphics, tight gameplay, and pulsing techno soundtrack. Reactions were mixed to WIPEOUT's difficulty, but that's a category in which it is literally impossible to please everyone. Disregarding a collection in 2017, we haven't seen an entry in the WIPEOUT series since 2012. While graphics aren't everything, we can't help but wonder how gorgeous a next-gen WIPEOUT could look and how impressive course designs could get on stronger hardware. With any luck, we might just find out. Number 4. Gran Turismo, 87.57%. The gold standard of racing games, Gran Turismo has been a PlayStation staple since 1997. Its consistently strong gameplay, tight controls, satisfying sense of speed, and variety of vehicles and locations have made it popular with both casual gamers and those who prefer realistic racing sims. It had a broad appeal right from the word go, debuting with an astounding average of 96%. That's the highest rated debut on this entire list, and from there, the scores remained impressive, dipping under 81% only once with Gran Turismo Sport for the PS4 and its relatively disappointing 75% average. There's almost certainly some gas left in the tank though. Gran Turismo includes many licensed vehicles, lovingly and meticulously constructed for the game with realistic handling and incredible attention to detail. As long as the Venn diagram of car enthusiasts and gamers has any overlap at all, the series will continue to have an audience. And what's more, online play has become an increasingly important aspect of the series, and finding the right mix of realism and fun could make the next title a must-have for many new fans. Gran Turismo is one of Sony's most recognizable and long-running series, and we reckon there's plenty of mileage in it yet. Number 3. Little Big Planet, 88%. During its first few years on the market, the PlayStation 3, which had launched at a ridiculously high price to lukewarm critical reception, desperately needed a killer app. For many, that app came in the form of 2008's Little Big Planet. The cuddly, family-friendly platformer won over gamers and critics alike, and it holds a remarkable 95% average on Metacritic. Only one other game on this list, Gran Turismo 3, managed to reach that score, and only 2 managed to surpass it. The gorgeous visuals, great soundtrack, and soothing tones of narrator Stephen Fry came together to create an irresistible platformer, but its real appeal was its incredibly versatile editor, which allowed players to create their own levels, characters, and objects. Little Big Planet was such a triumph that Sackboy, or Sackgirl, became a sort of de facto mascot for the PS3, and the series helped usher the console into a more successful era. We haven't seen a proper release for the PS4 yet. Little Big Planet 3 was designed with the PS3 in mind and ended up releasing on both systems, and with a new console generation on the horizon, we probably won't. But here's hoping we meet Sackboy again on the PS5. Number 2. Uncharted, 88.83%. Many of you watching no doubt expected Uncharted to take the number 1 spot, but don't be too upset that it didn't. It missed out by just 1.18 points. Uncharted has been a critical and commercial darling since its debut on the PS3, with its gorgeous graphics, exciting set pieces, and absolutely perfect cast. It asserted itself immediately as one of gaming's all-time great franchises. Half of its 6 titles scored above 90%, and it's the first game on this list to have no titles fall below 80%. The lowest rated game in the series is unsurprisingly Golden Abyss, the lone Vita entry. And the second lowest is The Lost Legacy with 84%, which frankly feels at least a couple of points too low. I thought it was fantastic. The series peaked according to Metacritic with Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. The game hit a remarkable average of 96%, tying it with Gran Turismo for the highest rated game on this entire list. Nathan Drake and his globe-trotting chums have absolutely earned their status as the second best Sony franchise of all time, but there's still one legendary series that just managed to squeak past them and steal the top spot. Don't look at him, Number 1, God of War, 90%. And here we are, the absolute best Sony franchise. Its seductive brutality, mythological inspirations, and instantly iconic hero, well, kind of hero, made the first game a hit in 2005, and it hasn't really lost momentum since. From a critical standpoint, the low point of the series was God of War Ascension, but even that holds a lofty 80% average. In fact, that's the highest, lowest score of any series on this list, if that makes sense. Ghost of Sparta is the second lowest rated game with 86%, and everything else in the series is comfortably in the 90s. In fact, the first game in the series was so immediately beloved that it ended up with a 94% average. That remained the highest scoring game in the series until 2018's masterpiece of a reinvention, which was fittingly enough also called God of War, and which also earned, believe it or not, an identical score of 94%. What's more, the inevitable sequel has every chance of scoring even higher. The series has clearly found a second wind, and it did so before it ever ran out of breath to begin with. Of all the series on this list, God of War likely has the most exciting future ahead, and will gladly take every bloody, gory, gritty step of the god-slaying journey right along with it. And there you have it. Every Sony franchise mathematically and therefore indisputably ranked from worst to best. What would your personal top 5 look like? Do you agree with the overall rankings? Is there a single good reason we haven't seen Ape Escape since 2005? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Also, if you have suggestions for every X ranked from worst to best videos, let us know. We look forward to being correct about as many topics as possible, and we know that in the interest of time, we had to set some pretty strict rules here. So if you would like to see us rank every PlayStation exclusive game from worst to best, I'm not saying we'll do it, but we'll think about it. You can follow myself and TripleJump on Twitter here, and while you're at it, why not support the things you enjoy by having a look at our Patreon. Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and thanks for watching.